CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Juliet Mann.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. US President Joe Biden promises more military aid for Ukraine during a surprise visit to Kiev, days ahead of the first anniversary of Russia's invasion.
But Russia's aim was to wipe Ukraine off the map. Putin's war of conquest is failing.
A year on the front line, how the residents of a once quiet Ukrainian town found themselves living amid the conflict.
China's most senior diplomat Wang Yi is in Hungary in the latest stop on his European tour.
And brewing up expansion plans in China, Scottish craft beer firm Brewdog is teaming up with America's Budweiser there. US President Joe Biden has made a surprise visit to Ukraine's capital. It's his first trip there since the war began and comes just days before the 12-month anniversary of the conflict.
Air raid sirens rang out as Biden walked through central Kiev with President Volodymyr Zelensky, but there were no reports of Russian strikes. Biden pledged new military aid for Ukraine worth $500 million and said further sanctions against Russia will be announced this week.
It was 1 year ago this week that we spoke on the telephone, Mr. President. It was very late at night in Washington, very early in the morning here in Kyiv. Russian planes were in the air and tanks were rolling across your border. You told me that you could hear the explosions in the background. I'll never forget that. And the world was about to change. I asked you, what is there, Mr. President? What can I do for you? How can I be of help? And I don't know if you remember what you said to me, but you said, and I quote, "Gather the leaders of the world, ask them to support Ukraine."
Our correspondent Will Denslow is in Kyiv. Will, just how significant is this visit?
Well, Juliet, it's incredibly significant. If we cast our minds back nearly a year ago, thousands of people here in Kyiv were fleeing the capital as Russian forces advanced. Now, nearly a year on, and the capital stands and is still very much in Ukrainian hands and is able to host a visit from a sitting US president. Coming out of this meeting, the US says it's pledging another $500 million in support, including ammunition and weapons. According to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, both he and President Biden discussed the possibility of sending more long-range weaponry to Ukraine. We heard from President Biden. He said that Kyiv stands, Ukraine stands, and that democracy stands. He added that the meeting with President Zelensky was very beneficial. He said that the commitment from the US, as well as much of the international community, is unwavering. President Zelensky said it was a fruitful meeting. Let's have a listen.
It was the conversation that indeed brings closer our joint victory in this war. We can and we must, so that 2023 becomes the year of victory. I want to underline that this unprovoked and criminal Russian war against Ukraine, the entirety of Europe and the entirety of the democratic world, must end with the liberation of Ukrainian land from Russian occupation, with solid guarantees of long-term security of our country, Europe and the entire world.
And well, what about the message that this sends to Russia and to President Putin?
Well, Juliet, President Biden said that Ukraine still faces difficult days, difficult weeks, even difficult years ahead. But he said that Russia's President Vladimir Putin sought to wipe Ukraine off the face of the map. He added that Russia's war of conquest had failed. He also made the point that while a year ago there were thousands, millions of Ukrainians leaving the country, President Biden saying today it is Russians that are leaving their country. Julia?
Well done, Slow in Kyiv. Thank you very much.
Our correspondent Stuart Smith is in Moscow. I asked him about the reaction from Russia to Biden's Ukraine visit.
The Deputy Security Council chairman and former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev said that it was known to Russia a few hours beforehand that this visit was going to take place, and it provided some kind of security guarantees, though he said that with Joe Biden promising more weapons, that he was in effect swearing allegiance to a neo-Nazi regime to the grave. A Crimean lawmaker said that this visit was a provocation. He called Zelensky and Biden dictators and said Russia should respond with a merciless response. One deputy head of the Duma Defense Committee, that's Russia's parliament, suggested that Biden was perfectly aware that the country of Ukraine may not exist in a year's time, so for him this was the perfect opportunity to visit a country which he described as a ghost country. So it certainly provoked reaction in Russia, although we haven't heard yet, and perhaps we will though hear this referenced when the Russian President Vladimir Putin makes his big speech on Tuesday.
And Stuart, yes, what can you tell us about this big speech on Tuesday? How important is that?
Well, it's been postponed since last year when it was meant to happen. At the time, the Kremlin saying because a number of events kept changing, the situation in Ukraine was moving very quickly, but this cannot be postponed any longer. And so it has been arranged for the week of the anniversary of the so-called special military operation. And although the statements itself, the speech, is closely under wraps, meaning that analysts are predicting all sorts of things from nothing revelationary to be expected or a really increasingly important statement, we don't really know. But we know that it will address the special military operation, and we can expect that the Kremlin will use the opportunity to try to show that, first of all, the Russian people do support what's going on, and frankly, independent polling suggests that indeed they do. Both the president and the special military operation as a whole, although there are many in Russia who don't. It also will be an opportunity for the president to outline how he believes the Russian military will be provided with all the resources that it needs, including the mobilized civilians that are fighting in Ukraine, and also a chance for Russia to say that it has made progress, although clearly with many of these annexed regions of Ukraine still not under Russian control, it can at this point not be declared a success, and there's no indication that the Russian president would try to call it as such. Instead, we might hear again, a bit like as we did last week with the foreign minister Sergei Lavrov, statements to the effect of this merely being the beginning, an attempt at creating a new world order, a multipolar world order, as we've heard so often from Russia, and that this should not be expected to be over any time soon. But it will be a reassuring message, as well as one I think we can expect to try to get the Russian public to support the continued use of force in Ukraine to resolve what Russia variously calls the end of neo-Nazis in Kiev, as well as protect the residents of Donbass.
After nearly a year of living under the constant threat of airstrikes and bombardment, the war in Ukraine is taking its toll.
Yolo Abdafeth reports from Chasiv Yar near Bakhmut, the once quiet town that has found itself on the front line in the battle for the east of the country.
Bakhmut is a battleground and has been for months. Artillery, machine guns and mortar teams are trying to hold a Russian advance in the east of the city. The front line is bolstered by heavier guns. The only route in and out is through Chasiv Yar. As their colleagues fight on, one squad of soldiers are able to relax for a week. You just come from Bakhmut.
Yes,
What's it like?
What's it like war? I don't know how to say it. Well, it's a hard situation, but we defend this town.
So how close do you get to the Russian soldiers?
We shoot on 3 kilometers, but some like 150 meters to Russian closer.
Do you get the sense there are more and more Russian soldiers coming?
No, I don't think so. He work now group, some like 3, 5, 7 guys. And now these Russian troops work in night time more. Daytime he hiding almost all time.
They're happy heading away from the war zone.
There are 3 people who've just driven here now. There's one woman who's been badly injured. She's in the back of that pickup truck with our security guy who's trying to give her medical attention. Thankfully, an ambulance has just arrived, but it just shows that with the artillery that's firing in this area, and one of the locals has been badly injured.
Ukrainian medics quickly assess that despite the best efforts of Yevgeny and Alexander, driving from near Bakhmut to try and save their neighbor, they were too late. The medics confirmed she'd bled to death in the back of the van. The cause, according to her friends, was an artillery shell landing near where they'd lived. She's another casualty in a conflict that we are not told how many die on either side. It's still bitterly cold in Ukraine, cold enough for neighbors to huddle together. In this apartment, 10 people sleep in 2 rooms. The kitchen is the main hub for a home that is their haven.
I'm very scared. I'm always talking to God and reading prayers. I ask for everything to be finished and I can go back to my children's home. When something happens, everyone runs to help, to close window shutters, to help each other. There aren't many people left here, but some of us are still living here.
But as the war comes closer, those who can move away to safety. Yolo David, Chasiv Yar near Bakhmut, Ukraine.
The European Union's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, says that delivering ammunition to Ukraine could determine the outcome of the war with Russia.
EU foreign ministers are meeting in Brussels, where they're also discussing a 10th package of sanctions against Moscow. That's expected to be agreed on before Friday, the first-year anniversary of the conflict.
How do we provide quicker arms to Ukraine, especially ammunition? You know that the most important pressing issue today for the Ukrainian army is to have a continuous flow of ammunition of 155 caliber, also 152, but 155 is the most important one. The Russian artillery shots about 50,000 shots a day. And Ukraine needs to be at the same level of capacity. They have cannons, but they don't lack ammunition.
Let's talk to our correspondent Alex Cadier, who's in Brussels. Alex, firstly, what's the reaction been from the European Union to Biden's surprise visit to Ukraine?
Well, the trip will have been welcomed by a lot of the European officials. Obviously, the show of unity, the show of support for Ukraine. There's a very strong alliance between the United States and the EU in their support of Ukraine in the face of Russia's invasion. So a very high-profile visit like Joe Biden's to Kyiv will have been a real sign, a real rallying sign for the allies and those supporting Ukraine. There's also some concerns in the last few months that there might be war fatigue, or the support from the United States to Ukraine may have waned a bit because of pressures on Joe Biden's administration from domestic political issues from the Republicans in Washington. Well, this visit, a clear sign of really reviving that energy, reviving that support, making sure that support is steadfast and strong for Ukraine. We know that the U.S. are the main providers of military aid and financial support to Ukraine. The European Union also providing a lot of support, but not quite matching what the U.S. is doing. And so that leadership role taken by Joe Biden by going to Kyiv has a really strong symbolic nature, as well as really cementing the West's support of Kyiv and of the Zelensky administration in their fight against the Russian invasion. To give you a sense of one response, Guy Verhofstadt, who's one of the most prominent parliamentarians in the European Parliament, former Prime Minister of Belgium, saying the leader of the free world sends a powerful message to a country fighting for European values of freedom and democracy. So that really strong response from Brussels, encouraged by that visit by President Biden to Kyiv.
And in Brussels, the European Union foreign ministers have been meeting, haven't they, Alex? Tell us a little bit more about what's on the agenda, what they've been discussing.
Well, busy old day for the foreign ministers. They've been discussing Ukraine, as you would imagine, that joint purchasing of ammunition proposed by the Prime Minister Kaja Kallas of Estonia a big suggestion supported by Josep Borrell, the EU's chief diplomat, about buying 1 million rounds of 155mm artillery shells collectively as the European Union. One of the complaints from the defence industry in smaller European member states is that they don't have enough orders to fulfil at the moment, or the orders aren't centralised or organised enough as it is. So that will be one of the things discussed on the table. Dmitry Kuleba, who's the Ukrainian foreign minister, was supposed to join his counterparts in the European Union here in Brussels, but obviously a high-profile visitor in Kyiv meant Mr. Kuleba could not travel to Brussels, but he will be speaking to those 27 ministers, foreign ministers in Brussels. There's also a discussion about Afghanistan, what the EU could do to step up its support of that country with the rather dire humanitarian situation there, but also talking to the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Moldova. Obviously Moldova under a lot of geopolitical pressure, neighbouring Ukraine, neighbouring Romania, a candidate status country for membership of the European Union that the EU is keen to help with energy, with financing, with reforming their economy, so a closer alliance there between Moldova and the EU, those key issues. And then finally, that 10th round of Russian sanctions. Officials are confident that those will be accepted and passed to coincide with the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine. They will target a number of Russian banks. They will add a number of Russian products like rubber and asphalt to the banned import list from the European Union, but also extend those sanctions not just to Russia specifically, but to the network around that supports Russia's war effort, so targeting entities linked to Iran's Revolutionary Guard, for example, for providing those kamikaze drones to Russia that we've seen deployed in Ukraine. So a very busy day for the EU's foreign ministers, and really kind of encompassing the full scope of the EU's priorities, both in Ukraine and around the world.
Thanks, Alex. Our correspondent, Alex Cadier, in Brussels.
Stay with us. Still to come here on Global Business. Cheers to China. British beer firm BrewDog is to expand in China after partnering with drinks giant Budweiser.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann. Welcome back. Take one Scottish craft brewer and an American giant of the drinks world, and what have you got?
Well, BrewDog and Budweiser hope the answer is expansion in China. The joint venture will see BrewDog's beer made in Budweiser China's brewery in Fujian province by the end of next month. The UK brewer also plans to open more BrewDog bars across the country. Well, BrewDog's CEO is James Watt. I asked him why China and why now?
So China is a huge beer market. It's in fact the biggest beer market globally, and we've got global aspirations as a business. We've been in the Chinese market since 2015, but with a small partner. And the deal that we've done with Budweiser is going to help us scale our business in China and help get our beer into as many people's hands as possible.
And has the COVID pandemic delayed your plans for this expansion in China?
I think the COVID pandemic has delayed a lot of plans in a lot of different places, but Hopefully that is behind us, and what we're excited about is moving forward. So at the moment we've got one retail location in China, we've got a bar in Shanghai. We want to open 10 more bars over the next 5 years and also get as much of our beer into distribution as possible.
China is the world's biggest beer market. How can you compete with the many other brands, foreign and domestic, that have a strong foothold in the market already?
That's a great question. So China, the world's biggest beer market, at the moment it just makes up 1% of our sales globally, so quite small for us, but we want to scale there. And we want to scale there the same way that we have in every other country we've had success. So taking our passion for fantastic beer, putting the taste, flavour, the artisan craftsmanship back into people's beer glasses, and focusing on community and sustainability as we look to develop our business and share the passion we've got with as many people as we can in China.
James, tell us about how this partnership with Budweiser came about. How's the deal going to work? Budweiser, of course, seen as a giant in the beer industry, perhaps a slightly different image to the craft beer industry that you represent.
Yeah, so independence is very, very important to us as a business. And one strategy that's enabled us to retain our independence yet expand internationally is working with big beer companies in select geographies. So we've got a joint venture with Asahi in Japan. We work with Svinkels in areas across Europe. So we're happy to work with big beer in terms of distribution, and that enables us to scale our business. The China partnership has been a long time in the making. We actually had advanced discussions with a whole host of partners, and it's taken maybe 3 or 4 years to get it all in place. So we're delighted we've got it in place now, and yeah, just keen to get going and see if we can sell some beer in China.
Absolutely. And a recent study by Taobao Tmall found that craft beer consumption in China shot up by 50% over the past couple of years. What do you think is driving that change, and how can BrewDog set itself apart?
So it's something that we're seeing not just in China, but globally. So more and more people are going towards beer styles like pale ale, like IPA, like stout, like porter. And I think people are just wanting an alternative to the more mainstream lagers that are in the market. So we're seeing that in the US, in the UK. We're seeing that as China, and we want to kind of be a catalyst for change in beer. So hopefully by our presence in China, by the joint venture, we can get more and more people drinking handcrafted, super high quality hoppy beers like our flagship beer, Punk IPA or Hazy Jane.
So you're not new to Asia. You mentioned that deal with Asahi in Japan, which was signed in 2021. I understand that doubled your sales in that country. Also plans for South Korea. Beyond expanding in your home market of the UK, how can that help you move on from the pandemic and the effects of Brexit and inflation?
Well, Brexit and inflation has been very tough, and the UK is a very tough place to do business at the moment. And I think the kind of challenges with inflation, energy crisis, almost makes it more difficult to do business in the UK just now than the challenges we faced during COVID. And as we look to scale our business, a lot of the kind of scale and future growth has to come from international. So we've got a well-established business now in the US, in Australia, in Germany, in France and Italy. The joint venture in Japan is going really well, and we're keen to build on the success of these international expansions by trying to tackle the world's biggest beer market, which is China.
And back in 2020, BrewDog planned to list in London, but postponed the planned IPO because of COVID that you mentioned before, affected hospitality revenues and broiled markets, across the world, of course. Are you still planning to have an IPO at some point?
Yes, that is very much part of the thinking. So the markets have been hit by the kind of shockwave of COVID, and then in the UK, the cost of living and inflation environment. So it makes it very difficult for high growth companies to IPO at the moment. But it's very much part of our plans, very much part of our thinking, and something that we're moving towards, and something we'd love to do when the timing's right for the business and for the markets.
European markets have been up and down on Monday, with muted activity as US markets are closed for President's Day. Investors are really looking ahead to consumer confidence data coming out, and the US Fed publishing notes from its latest meeting. Mining stocks lifted things a little bit, while household goods, tech and retail stocks pulled in the other direction. Let's talk to Susanna Streeter, who's head of money and markets at Hargreaves Lansdown, a financial services company based in the UK. Good to see you, Susanna. So a slow start to the week on European markets, but stocks seems strong despite all of the economic uncertainty out there.
Yes, I think really investors are searching for a bit of sense of direction, really. what we saw the end of last week was that uncertainty creeping back in again about just how far interest rates will go up in the United States and how long they will stay there for, because we had all of that strong data out, retail sales, for example, coming out much stronger than expected, a whole raft of data really showing that actually, you know, the war on inflation is not yet over, and it's going to take a lot more effort from the central bank to rein it in. And so that's why you saw some weakness creeping in. What you're seeing today is, yes, markets on Wall Street shut President's Day, but I think there's also a look towards China and the reopening in China, perhaps as a counterbalance for uncertainty about what's happening in the United States and to some extent Europe as well.
And it's quite light on the data front this week, but there are some hints that Germany's economy is, well, in their words, somewhat brighter. So what's changed?
Yes, we have had that snapshot out showing that actually the German economy does seem to be more resilient. And what is crucial as well is that there is this expectation that Germany is now past that peak inflation that had been so worrying. Of course, what's been happening is the fact that energy prices have come down considerably. We've had warmer weather, we've had stockpiles not being eaten into to the same extent. In fact, gas storage levels remain across Europe about 65%, which is some way above the 10-year average. And that has all really lifted sentiment, particularly in Germany. The economy is showing much more resilience than had been feared.
And oil seems to be bouncing back. To what extent do you think that's a China story?
Yes, I do think that that's certainly led by China and the Chinese reopening following, of course, the restrictions that have dampened down demand. There is an expectation that companies are going to be using a lot more energy going forward. But also we do have supply side issues as well eating into this with the United States, saying that there are going to be stricter sanctions on Russia in the energy sector and the financial sector as well, which is added to some concerns about the security of supply and whether or not there will be enough oil around to meet demand, which is also supporting prices. But as a counter to that, of course, you're not seeing them running away because we have still this ongoing concern about weakness in general across the global economy because of this ratcheting up of interest rates.
Susanna Streeter from Holger Blanson, thank you very much for that snapshot of what's happening on European markets. Thank you.
Meta is launching a subscription service for Facebook and Instagram. The new program, called Meta Verified, includes account verification badges. It'll be rolled out in Australia and New Zealand this week, with other countries to follow. Our correspondent John Terrett is live in New York for more on this. Hi there, John. So this sounds a bit like Twitter's blue tick.
Hey, Paul. Yep, Paul and Juliet, exactly right. I believe it to be the same thing. And of course, Mark Zuckerberg made this announcement over the weekend. And when he talks, we just have to report on him because he's one of the most interesting people in our world at the moment, along with Elon Musk, who plays into this story as well. So the thing is, basically, this is for Facebook and Instagram, or Insta, as we trendy young New York things like to say. They already give you one of these blue badges if you are a politician or an organization or a company or an executive, and can basically prove who you are through the initial sign-up process. But now you too can have a blue badge, and so can I if we want to. The trouble is it's expensive. Facebook wants to charge $11.99, so that's basically $12 a month, which is $144 a year. That's, I know, exactly, Juliet, and that's if you're using the web. And then Juliet's shocked, I can tell. And wait for you, if you think that's bad, if you use an iPhone, they're going to charge you $15 a month, which is $180 a year. I think that's a lot of money for a lot of people, I really do. I mean, I would be prepared to go myself to, I don't know, I'm 20, 40, maybe if you push me, maybe even $50 a year, I think. But 180 is an awful lot. Now, what you do is, in America, we're all used to giving our government ID every time we go into a building or we go into a theater or a cinema or whatever. You're asked for your ID all the time. So you post your ID to Facebook by scanning it, or your passport, and then they approve you or they don't, and you get a blue badge, and then you can say to everybody, look, this is really me. And I guess that's authentic, really, if you are running a business on Facebook or you're sort of just in some organization and you want to prove who you really are. Now, Zuckerberg says this is all about authenticity and security. And of course, Facebook has been accused, and we've done this on this program many times in the past, of ignoring those things in favor of profits, particularly when it comes to young girls and their body image on Instagram. Now, it is, as you quite rightly say, being rolled out first in Australia and in New Zealand. And I checked just now, and it's already Tuesday for them. It's already 3 in the morning in Australia and 5 in the morning in New Zealand. So they've had a day of this already. It'll be rolled out in other countries, I suppose, in the coming weeks and months. And Facebook and Meta platforms are hoping that they can avoid what happened to Elon Musk over at Twitter. Remember, he took over Twitter back in, what was it, October or November time, and immediately within weeks introduced the $8 blue tick of authenticity, and then people started impersonating other people. People didn't know who they were, what the blue tick really meant. So it was withdrawn for a while, and then they brought it back, and now there's 3 levels of ticks. I think there's a gold, a silver, and a blue. But Facebook says we won't fall into that trap. We have software to stop that happening. So we'll see how it all works out.
Yeah, very interesting to see how it does indeed pan out. So, John, what else have you got for us today? Bit of a quiet one at the stock exchange?
Yes, well, you will know. I'm not there, am I? I could have gone there. I could have done, but I decided I wouldn't. I go to the Associated Press studios in New York. This is ground zero here. The stock exchange is over there somewhere. And it is actually sunnier than it looks here, to be honest with you. It's a better day than that shot actually looks at the moment. But it's President's Day. That's the thing. Now, President's Day is in honor of Abraham Lincoln's birthday. And we have some sad news in America today because President Jimmy Carter has opted for hospice at home in Plains, Georgia. Now, he's 98 years old now. He was the 39th president of the United States, had a terrible time in the White House, completely rehabilitated himself, and is now a much-loved former president in America. But unfortunately, I think his days are coming to an end. So that's what we're dealing with over here at the moment. The stock exchange is open today. I could have gone there if I wanted to, but there's no actual trading. The security staff are there. This week coming up, it's a big week for retail, so we'll hear from Walmart and Home Depot and Baidu, which is China's Google, and Alibaba, the big e-commerce platform. That's on Thursday. And 2 words to use that I haven't used on this program before: ugly and disruptive. Inflation is back as of... I know. I thought, when I first saw that, I thought, is that a Jamie Owen school report from 1976? And I'm led to believe that I think it probably was, to be honest with you, but it's also...
I was going to say you shouldn't talk about him in his absence.
Anyway, it's about inflation, of course, because inflation is back. Wall Street realized it. The S&P was down for 2 weeks in a row as of last Friday. And if you talk to any economist here, as Suzanne Streeter from Bristol was just saying on our program, you talk to any economist and they're split. Some think there's going to be a soft landing and no recession at all. Others think we're heading for a deep recession, which is prompted by the number of people who are presently not meeting their car loans. They're behind on their car loans. And they think that when that hits, it's going to be what happened in 2008 when people couldn't pay their mortgages, and we're going to have a very deep recession. But, you know, you have to pay your money and you take a chance. Whoever you speak to seems to have a different opinion.
John Terrett, always a big golden tick from us. Thank you very much indeed. Bye, John. Thanks.
Well, tech giant Ericsson is to cut 1,400 jobs in its native Sweden as part of global budget reductions. Ericsson wants to save around $900 billion worldwide as demand slows in markets including North America. The company says it's already come to an agreement with Swedish unions over redundancies, but there are reports that more cuts are likely in other countries.
The UK's biggest retailer, Tesco, is raising the hourly pay rates for its store workers by 7% from April. They'll now get $13.25 an hour, up from $12.40. It's the 3rd pay increase for Tesco workers in the last 10 months as the UK battles a cost of living crisis. The latest rise will cost the supermarket chain almost $280 million.
Shipping group Maersk is nearing its complete exit from Russia after it agreed to sell 2 logistics sites in the country to IG Finance Development. Maersk still needs to sell 4 tugboats under its Svitzer brand, a process that's still going on. After that, Maersk will not have any business in Russia. As the motor industry moves closer and closer towards an all-electric future, Mercedes-Benz appears to have pulled ahead of the pack in Europe. 2022 figures saw sales of EVs more than double compared to the previous year. Well, Jamie Owen spoke to CEO Ola Källenius about the company's electric dreams and the bumps in the road.
We have launched a whole host of battery electric vehicles over the last couple of years, and we have more in the pipeline. In fact, this year we're launching at least 2. And if you look at just the technical specs of these vehicles, we have top range, top efficiency, fantastic hyper screens in the car that open up to a whole world of digital offerings to our customers. So it is, on the one hand, about staying ahead in the innovation race and being a leader in the innovation race, which has always been our underlying DNA, but at the same time putting it into the right wrapping. So when you get a Mercedes, you have this high-tech, but in a luxury setting. So you got to get both of those things right. And when we do that, the fan base of Mercedes honors that with strong demand.
How far are we from seeing safe, autonomous driving cars from Mercedes?
We have been working on assisted driving for more than 20 years. You could even argue we are inventors of assisted driving, and now we are in the early era of autonomous drive, where we have the first situations where actually the computer takes over. Last year, we were the first manufacturer to launch a so-called level 3 vehicle with our S-Class. On the Autobahn in Germany, in heavy traffic and traffic jam situations, the computer take over and you're truly autonomous. So the customer gets back the most valuable gift of all, time, and the car drives you. So you have a computer chauffeur. That first few baby steps into actually now proliferating autonomous drive into the market. And you will see as this decade moves on, that step by step we will increase this envelope. And the assistance systems also help you. They are little angels in the background that make driving safer.
And let me ask you, as a boss of one of the world's most famous car companies, for you, what is now important? Is it the car factory or the battery factory?
It's both. We are investing billions into the new technologies, electrifying the car, the electric drivetrain, but also the digitalization of the vehicle, putting supercomputing-like processing power into the vehicles, but not forgetting all the values that you expect from a Mercedes. You know, everything needs to feel right, be right, the ride, the drive, the look, the feel. All of those things matters as well. So it's a high-tech race for transformation technologies, but it's also taking what we have done for 100 years plus and taking that to the next level.
Do you recognize there is a sort of crisis for the manufacturers of EVs around the world, in that buying an EV and driving an EV is, in a sense, a question of displaced virtue? Yes, there are electric vehicles, but somewhere in many countries there's a coal-fired power station or a gas-fired power station or an oil-fired power station running these vehicles. It's a conundrum that none of you have really come up with a solution to.
Ultimately, for this transformation of mobility, 3 things need to go hand in hand. The development of the product, which is our job, and we'll take care of that. The development of the infrastructure to make sure that you can charge when you are on a longer trip. And thirdly, it is the energy transition. So the energy transition that you're referring to is hugely important.
See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail. The background.
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Paul Barber and me, Juliet Mann. The headlines again. President Joe Biden makes a surprise visit to Kyiv, days ahead of the first anniversary of Russia's invasion.
The US leader promises more weapons for Ukrainian forces and new sanctions against Russia during his visit. While China's top diplomat Wang Yi is in Hungary on the latest leg of his tour of Europe, with Ukraine dominating the discussions. He held talks with Hungary's foreign minister following a private dinner with Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Orban has warned against increasing Western intervention in the conflict. Pablo Gutierrez is following the events for us in Budapest. He joins us now live. So, Pablo, what's been discussed about the Ukraine conflict?
Well, nearly a year has passed since the onset of the Ukraine conflict, and today Europe remains a continent at war. That is why Hungary and China called on all peace-loving nations to help bring an end to the hostilities. China's top diplomat Wang Yi and Hungary's foreign minister Peter Szijjártó said that they would like Ukraine and Russia to come back to the negotiating table. Would be the largest factory of its kind in Europe, providing hundreds of jobs for the region. Now, Mr. Szijjártó also thanked China for its support during the COVID-19 pandemic. China provided vaccines and also PPE, personal protective equipment, and Mr. Szijjártó said that this helped save hundreds of thousands of Hungarian lives. He said that the relation with China will continue to be warm and will continue to progress economically and diplomatically.
Pablo Gutierrez in Budapest. Many thanks.
Hopes for a speedy resolution to the controversial post-Brexit trade deal for Northern Ireland appear to be fading. There were reports that a compromise between the UK and the EU could be revealed as early as today, but with opposition mounting, any agreement appears to be on hold. Our correspondent Michael Voss has more.
Northern Ireland has been without an effective government ever since the largest unionist party, the DUP, refused to join a power-sharing agreement in the province's devolved parliament. It said it wouldn't join as long as the post-Brexit trade agreement, which puts a customs border down the Irish Sea, remains. They say it undermines its place in the UK. It also objects to the European Court of Justice having final say over trade disputes. But after meeting Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in Belfast last Friday, the DUP left the door open for a possible deal.
We have not yet seen the final text of an agreement. Clearly there will be further discussions between the UK government and the European Union, but I think it is safe to say that progress has been made across a range of areas, but there are still some areas where further work is required.
Then over the weekend, Rishi Sunak met the EU's President, Ursula von der Leyen, leading to speculation that an agreement was in the making and that the details could be revealed on Monday. The new arrangement is aimed at fixing former Prime Minister Boris Johnson's controversial Northern Ireland Protocol, which was part of the Brexit agreement he negotiated to leave the EU. The province is part of the UK, but Ireland to the south remains within the bloc. For the past 25 years, there's been an open land border between the two, a key component of the historic Good Friday Agreement, which ended decades of bloody sectarian conflict. Now, with the border down the Irish Sea, all goods entering Northern Ireland are subject to EU customs checks and significant paperwork and costs. One new proposal is to simplify the customs procedure, introducing a fast-track green lane for goods destined for Northern Ireland and a red lane for goods heading to the EU. The other main political party, Republican Sinn Féin, supports the protocol but wanted it improved and reacted positively after meeting Rishi Sunak.
I believe that very, very significant progress has been made, and I believe that a deal is absolutely possible and absolutely necessary, and I hope that we see a speedy, successful conclusion to matters.
But Rishi Sunak now faces opposition from hardline Brexiteers within his own Conservative Party, including Boris Johnson, who see it as giving in to the European Union. Now the DUP are claiming there won't be any deal this week. Solving this would be a major triumph for Rishi Sunak, who's under pressure from all sides. Michael Voss, CGTN.
Still ahead on Global Business Europe, the United States pledges long-term help for Turkey as rescue efforts are wound down in the earthquake zone.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw. The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew. And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
And welcome back to Global Business Europe. The US has pledged long-term aid for Turkey after devastating earthquakes hit the country 2 weeks ago.
During a trip to badly affected regions in the southeast, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken promised $100 million more in aid, which is in addition to the $85 million already pledged. Turkey wound down rescue operations on Sunday. Authorities are now focusing on wide-scale demolition of buildings. CGTN's Michal Bardavid is in Gaziantep. Michal, rescue efforts then were winding down, but what's the latest where you are?
Well, we are here in Gaziantep, one of the 10 provinces that were affected by the earthquake. Today, the Disaster and Emergency Management Authority stated that they continued rescue efforts in the city of Hatay at the location of 15 buildings. We don't have any news of survivors from there yet, but they still are continuing the rescue efforts. We do believe that they are going to complete the rescue efforts either today or latest tomorrow. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was visiting the earthquake zone today. He was in Hatay and Kahramanmaraş. The government really focused on providing shelter for earthquake survivors in the last 2 weeks. Specifically, thousands of buildings collapsed and left over 1 million people homeless. Now, the government says that they have been able to place 1.2 million people into different kinds of shelters, into tents, containers, and dormitories of universities. They've also been able to evacuate over 485,000 people from this region. Now, we've talked to a lot of survivors. They're now saying that their main basic urgent need is basically access to sanitary facilities such as bathrooms and showers right now. And medical experts are warning that they really need to get access to sanitary facilities because otherwise there is a risk of spreading of infectious diseases in this region specifically. Regarding more serious injuries in the beginning of the earthquake, after the earthquake took place, they were focusing on trauma injuries, orthopedic operations and amputations. Now medical experts are saying that they're focusing on rehabilitation for survivors, for those who have been injured during the earthquake.
Michal Bardavid from Gaziantep, thank you very much for that update.
And finally, protesters have vowed to fight for the soul of Israel as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu advances his plans for judicial reform through Parliament. Demonstrations are being held across the country as the Knesset holds its first reading of the proposals, which would see the government have greater sway over appointing judges and reduce the Supreme Court's power to strike down legislation. Stephanie Freed reports now from Tel Aviv.
Nationwide protests, blocked highways, arrests, ferocious arguments, demonstrators physically preventing pro-overhaul parliamentarians from leaving their homes.